I'm excited, you guys. Here we are. It is Thursday. It is time to drink some wine. If you are just joining us, welcome. Thank you guys for taking some time and jumping into a little bit of a live session with us. We are live. We are with the Rhone Rangers, the Santa Barbara County chapter. So we're going to be talking about Syrah today, you guys. We have International Syrah Day coming up here in the near future here this month. But we've got some exciting things to talk about with Syrah. We're here with Kristin Bryden from Zaca Mesa. We're here with Larry Schaffer from Tercero, Bob Lindquist from Lindquist Family Wines, Matt Brady from SAMsARA, and then I am your host and moderator today, Lamar, with the Wine Militia. So I'm excited. I want to get right into this. We have 4 wines that are lined up, ready to rock and roll here, and they all, I just did a little sniff test, and I think everybody would agree. These all smell very different. We're in for a world of diversity, I think, today. It's gonna be a riot. So I think without further ado, we should dive in. I have a personal anecdote just to kind of break the ice a little bit. My first Syrah, I've been in the wine industry since 1999, and I remember my first Syrah was, this would have been in 2002. I was in a restaurant in San Francisco, working in a restaurant, and it was a Zaca Mesa Syrah, you guys. My first California Syrah. Believe it or not, I'm kind of embarrassed to say that I didn't know a lot about Syrah until I started tasting Zaca Mesa. So I think that's a perfect segue. We should probably talk about the history of where Syrah and Santa Barbara started. We can't start without having Bob Lindquist here talk a little bit about where it started. Bob, where did the Syrah come from here in Santa Barbara?
Well, it started at Zaca Mesa, and it came from Gary Eberly, who had planted some in Paso Robles prior to that. I think Gary planted his vineyard in 1974, I believe, and I started working at Zaca Mesa in 1979, and they had just planted a new block of Petite Syrah, which then became the Black Bear block. That's a tough one to say fast. Anyways, while I was at Zaca Mesa, we kept tasting kind of young, new California Syrahs, and we were also tasting wines from the Rhone to kind of get, the benchmarks and so forth. And Ken Brown, who was the winemaker at Zaca Mesa at the time, Jim Clendon was the assistant winemaker, myself and Adam Tolmack, the 4 of us kind of all agreed that it made more sense to have Syrah than to have Petite Syrah at Zaca Mesa. And so I'm not sure what year it was, I want to say 1980, that Petite Syrah block was grafted over to Syrah from budwood that Zaca Mesa got from Gary Eberly. And then in 1983, they harvested the first crop from it. It probably would have come a little bit sooner than that, but for some reason it wasn't, crop worthy until 1983. So that's where it started. And yeah, pretty cool.
This brings me to a fascinating question. So before that, you guys were doing a little benchmarking, it sounded like. So you were tasting some Syrahs. Do you remember some of the Syrahs that you were tasting to kind of benchmark?
Yeah, absolutely. Most of them came from Kermit Lynch. He was kind of a marker, for bringing in some of the best and best value Rhone wines. So Chave Hermitage was an early influence. Gripa, San Joseph was also an early influence. Champé, Côte Rôtie. So those were the wines that we were drinking, and then of course we also had Guigal and some of the other bigger names. Even though Guigal wasn't that big a name back then, but
yeah,
it became one. But and Jabalais, and so those were the kind of things that we were trying and holding up as benchmarks. Not so much Champé. Champé, I don't know if you ever had Emile Champé's. He's no longer with us, and I don't know what happened to his vineyards or the lineage of that property, but he made some pretty funky Côte Rôtie that was really interesting, and it took a lot of time to develop in both the bottle and the glass. But anyway, so those were the kind of things, and it was more than any other wine, the Gripa San Joseph, which is now owned by Guigal, that vineyard block on the steep granitic part of San Joseph, was the benchmark for me and for us at Zaca Mesa, because it was elegant. It seemed more cool climate-ish.
Sure.
And it was also it was the most fairly priced and seemed like a direct correlation price-wise, market-wise, to what we were doing in Santa Barbara County.
You couldn't have teed it up any better. I was going to ask you about the market after you guys planted like the Black Bear block in Zaca Mesa. What was the market doing? Was it interested in Syrah? Was it something that
No, I mean Syrah. I mean there were wine geeks, and certainly sommeliers and restaurateurs and so forth, retailers who knew about Syrah and knew about Rhone wines. But the great Syrahs from the Northern Rhone are produced in pretty small quantity. I mean, that's grown, over the years. But back then, in the late 70s, there wasn't, there wasn't that much Chave Hermitage that came to the U.S. or Gripa San Josef. So not that many consumers really knew what it was. And there were only a handful, in fact, I count on less than one hand, of California producers who were already making Syrah. And Joseph Phelps was the first, and his first Syrah was the 1974 vintage. So that's how kind of recent Syrah is in California. So the market was not there yet. It had to be developed. And
sure. So this is great, because we're talking a little bit about kind of the baton, the torch that was carried with Syrah basically as the forebearer for the Rhone Rangers. There was a great question by Mr. Stephen Hewitt. He's asking, Bob, was it more of a Northern Rhone benchmark, or was it a Southern Rhone benchmark for the original Rhone Rangers?
Well, that's for the Rhone Rangers, it was all across the board, because when the Rhone Rangers started, it was producers from all over California, and it wasn't just about Syrah, even though Syrah was probably the dominant grape. But it was also about Grenache and Mourvedre and even at that point Marsanne and Viognier. Yeah. So the Rhone Rangers started with that kind of foundation of multiple varietals, but I would say that Syrah led the way, and in Santa Barbara County, because of our climate,
it
was more Northern Rhone-ish in aspect than Southern Rhone-ish.
Yeah. This is great. I think I love hearing about the history. That was a great question too, by the way, Steve. So I appreciate that. The crazy thing is that as we see kind of Zaca Mesa kind of evolving a little bit, there is definitely, we're talking about the torch of Syrah being handed off. We have Kristin Bryden here, who is obviously making the wines now for Zaca Mesa. Kristin, let's talk a little bit about the Z Block, if you will. Give us a little bit of background on that, and then we're going to dive into some wines.
The Black Bear block.
Black Bear block.
Yeah, that's okay. So just the history, as Bob said, we started bottling this block in '94. So our first Syrah that was bottled was in '83, but then the actual Black Bear block started being bottled in '94. So I believe we've done a vintage ever since, but don't quote me on that, because obviously I wasn't there. So but yeah, there's obviously a lot in our library to taste through, but it's, if you taste all of the Syrahs in our portfolio, there's definitely a distinct characteristic that stands out with this wine. Obviously vine age plays a huge role in that. There's just a wonderful refinement to the tannin profile, and that's consistent vintage to vintage. We took cuttings from that block and used those cuttings of the Australia clone and planted in '99, 2004, and 2012 Australia clone in the vineyard. So it's interesting to see as the vines age and develop over time, how those profiles change a little bit. But the Black Bear is definitely unique and stands out in any blind tastings that we do with our wines. So. You
touched on something. Yeah, go ahead, Bob.
I just is the Black Bear block the original block that was planted to Syrah?
Yeah.
When you said but you just started keeping it separate.
Yeah, we started separating it and bottling on its own. Yeah.
Fascinating.
That's what I thought. Okay.
Yeah.
So you touched on something, Kristin, that I want to know about, because I think when people hear like the terminology clones, and kind of, we're talking about Syrah being kind of its own animal, but it has all these different personalities. And we're definitely talking about that with this block that's kind of pioneered a lot of the Syrah love here in Santa Barbara. Can you give us kind of some background on what clones are? And again, for people that are watching, I know this sounds kind of elementary, but we're not talking about GMOs here. We're talking about personalities of the great flavors. So give it to us, Kristin. What do you?
Yeah, I mean, this clone of Syrah came from Estrella River Winery. That's why it's called the Estrella clone. And basically, you know, they're always mutating, you know, over time. And so it's just kind of, you know, what develops within our site. You know, you probably would see some similarities with the Estrella clone. I mean, it's planted, I'd say a lot of the cuttings early on came from Zaca Mesa that were planted in other vineyard sites. So you would see a common thread, you know, of that profile, and we see it, you know, within our blocks as well. But you know, we have 9 different clones of Syrah, and you don't really hear people talk about that a lot,
Right.
because you know, where Pinot Noir, it's more common. But if you talk to winemakers, they definitely have their favorites. And you do see some consistency from different vineyard sites with different clones and their profiles as far as, you know, their tannin structure, their fruit profile, things like that.
I want to get into that when we start tasting a little bit, because I want to come back to that. I feel like it's like we're looking for band members to play in this band, and you could have these different clones that have great personalities and great talent. So I want to come back to that, because you know I love the music thing. But I think we need to dive into some wine. And thank you, Kristin. We're gonna jump into some wine. I think Larry, I think you should lead the charge on the first sip tonight. 1, because I love your hat, and then 2, I think we're talking expressive, and I just have a feeling that you have a lot to say about this wine. Let's dive in. If you guys are watching, we are going to dive into this first wine here. Larry, talk to us a little bit. I froze. There we go.
Sure. So this is my 2014 Larner Vineyard Syrah from Ballard Canyon. It is the Estrella clone as well. I really like the Estrella clone. I think it's it shows well in every vineyard site I've ever worked with. Definitely a little juicier, a little more fruit forward, and it really works with the style that comes out of this vineyard. This is actually co-fermented with Viognier. Actually, in 2014, I brought the fruit in and I broke it into 2 fermentations. One of them was co-fermented with 15% Viognier, and the other one was fermented with none. Both of them were whole cluster. So grapes came in, foot stomped them. I didn't even sort the fruit. I foot stomped them, fermented them, pressed them, and then settled them into barrel. And I found that I ended up going with 2 barrels of the Viognier and 1 barrel without. I just felt that they both brought something different to the table. This is actually a future release for me. I know it's a 14 and it seems like it's an old wine, but it was in oak again for 34 months, unracked, and it's been in bottle for a couple of years. And to me, it's still a very young, very lean wine. It's about 12.9% alcohol, which is by far the lowest of the alcohols, I think, on the Syrahs we're having. And it still needs time. I was joking before, saying that all these wines need to open up. I think mine needs about 2 or 3 days, but that's a whole other story. But I love Syrah. I love the dynamic nature of it. And I love that it can be grown both in cool and warm climates. You know, so often the focus is on cool climate Syrah, but warm climate Syrah has this fruit quality about it that's very enticing to a lot of consumers. I think that all the sites that we're working with tend to be a little cooler than warmer. So this is not going to show that kind of cherry robitussin you oftentimes get with really warm climate Syrahs. But there's appeal. I think Syrah is kind of like a chameleon of a grape, because it can grow well everywhere. It just depends upon the profile and the style that you want with it. It's also a grape that can handle a lot of new oak, but it doesn't have to. This is all older oak barrels, 4 to 10-year-old oak barrels. Okay. It doesn't necessarily need the oak, but it doesn't mind the oak.
So you touched on something that I want to come back and talk about, and use the term co-fermenting with Viognier. I have a couple questions that I wanted to ask you about that, but specifically, what distinguishes that decision? Is it a program thing that you're like, I'm going to always, or is it something that you decide to make that decision along the way?
So the history of that goes back to Côte Rôtie in France, and I'm sure Bob may have some interesting insight into that. I've had a long discussion with Jim Clendenin that we definitely sit on different sides of the fence in terms of why I think Côte Rôtie, why this is done. But basically, my understanding is that area is so cold. The Viognier was it was planted along with the Syrah, and when you pick the Viognier at the same time you're picking the Syrah, the Viognier is going to be a lot riper. The Viognier is going to add sugar that the Syrah doesn't have, and it's also going to decrease the acidity that the Syrah is going to have. So it's going to soften it to an extent. There is a feeling that Viognier oftentimes adds a floral aspect to Syrah when you co-ferment them, and by co-fermenting, they are actually fermented together. I can't necessarily say that's the case. I always get a floral aspect to my Larner Syrah, regardless of whether I do co-ferment or not. But the decision to co-ferment really comes down to Michael Larner himself. They don't grow a lot of Viognier there. If he happens to have Viognier, this is the only block of Syrah that he will kind of allow the Viognier to go co-fermented with. They grow 5 different clones, I think, of Syrah there. But this block sits right next to the Viognier. So some years I'm able to get it. This year, for instance, I got a tiny bit. So I think my co-ferment is about 5% in 2020. But every year it's different. In some years, the last couple of years, I haven't gotten any because he hasn't gotten a lot of fruit. So I kind of get what I get. And when I co-ferment, I'm a big believer that if it doesn't come off the same vineyard at the same time, I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
And so I've done it both with White Hawk and with Larner, but only on years where it's possible to do it.
What's the biggest challenge of the co-fermentation process? Is it the grapes coming in at separate times? I'm imagining.
I wouldn't really say it's a challenge. I mean, the Viognier comes in, it's ugly. It's ripe, very ripe. You don't really care about that. It's a bizarre thing to see white grapes fermented with red grapes. It's always a fun picture to post, and people always think I'm making a mistake. But I don't think there's really a challenge with it. I think it's just kind of a fun thing to do. I don't go into it with any specific expectations other than it's going to create a wine that's different than it would be without it. Is it better? I'm not necessarily going to say that. I just like the process, and I like seeing those white grapes in there. And I've always liked the results of it. So
yeah, I love it. It's jazzy. It's got a lot going on. It's got some personality to it. There's something really fun about it that kind of lifts in the palate. So I'm assuming that's a little bit to do with the decision to co-ferment too at the same time. I think that's fun. I love it. Thank you for sharing that. I want to come back to that and taste it as we kind of progress a little bit. But I've been eyeing this one wine specifically as I'm also looking at Mr. Matt Brady there in the distance. Matt, I don't know about you, but I think it might be time to maybe talk a little bit about your Zotovich Vineyards Syrah. What do you think?
Yeah, let's do it. It's kind of a good segue because Larry was just talking about whole cluster Syrah from his Larner Vineyard wine. And whole clusters are a really core part of what SAMsARA does for our whole red wine program for Pinot Grenache and Syrah. But for Syrah, the Zotovich Vineyard, the wine that we're drinking tonight, Zotovich is kind of in the heart of Santa Rita Hills, definitely right in the middle of Pinot country. But as we've kind of talked about already tonight, and it's sort of emerging as the theme about how Syrah is really a chameleon that can thrive in a wide range of climates. And, depending on what you want, there's almost a climate for any style. And, Santa Rita Hills, it's really on the very cool extreme of where Syrah, can ripen and thrive. And it creates a different beast. It's a totally different expression of Syrah than you get from warmer sites. I've got the wine in my glass right now, and to me, this 17 Zotovich Vineyard Syrah is just straight charcuterie board. It's like smoked meats and olives, and just a whole different piece of the flavor and aromatic spectrum that for me is really complex and really, really interesting. And I think stylistically we're always shooting to make really balanced wines, picking a little on the early side, but not aggressively early. But we're trying to walk that line between balance and elegance, but also having, texture and weight and, sort of making the wines powerful in that respect. It's not really powerful from a ripeness driven way, but more kind of weighty and textural and, complex. And, whole cluster really allows us to achieve that. The cool vineyard side at Zotovich is great for, maintaining natural acidity and keeping the wine sort of fresh and balanced. The soils in Santa Rita Hills and at Zotovich in particular are just super interesting. Really sandy soils, lots of mineral deposits and diatomaceous earth. And, I think with the slightly more elegant approach to the winemaking, you capture a lot of that, that complexity that the soils impart. Yeah, and I'm pretty pleased with how this wine's showing right now. I think it's taken a little while to get there, but that's another thing that we see with the whole cluster style is that it can be, slightly unfriendly early on and really rewards additional cellaring and, helps give the wines that longevity to really make them last.
I have to tell you, you nailed it. This definitely has a story in a glass. I mean, this has a lot going on in a good way. I love the smoked meats analogy. That's definitely something that just hits me too. But it calls me to keep drinking. I like that. Talk to me a little bit about maybe some of the challenges, that kind of the struggle with doing like a whole cluster Syrah program like this. I mean, what is the biggest drawback for you? You can be as real as you want.
Yeah, well, I don't think it's something that works for every site,
Okay.
And I think when we're at SAMsARA, when we're looking at vineyards and trying to select what vineyards we want to partner with, how the fruit's going to respond to whole cluster fermentation is one of the biggest qualifiers. Having a cool site is really important because the stems will raise the pH of the wine. So for me, I really want vineyards that are going to produce fruit with naturally, balanced or even slightly low pHs, because I know we're going to get that pH bump when we throw all the stems in there. This Zotovich Syrah was 75% whole cluster fermented.
Wow.
And following 17 was my first vintage with SAMsARA, so I really wanted to experiment with all our sites and kind of ferment everything in small lots at different levels of stem inclusion, so I could really learn, my perspective on what I thought was best for each vineyard. Mm-hmm. The 17 vintage, we've just been going full 100% whole cluster at Zotovich, because it's got, the stems are going to be, they're going to have a big impact on the wine, and it's almost more important what all the other stuff is in the calculus of determining whether or not whole cluster is going to work, because the stems are going to bring, extra tannin. They're going to impact the aromatic profile. For me, they have a great impact on texture and mouthfeel. But you kind of need all the other elements of the wine. You need the other volume knobs turned up a little, all to be in balance. So, if you don't have naturally high acidity, it might not work. If you don't have, flavor concentration, the extra structure you get from the stems is going to be out of balance with the wine. So there's some other qualifiers that really make it all come together. And a little bit of it is a leap of faith. I mean, I guess there's experience that goes into making that leap of faith. But when you taste those young wines right after harvest or right after pressing, they can be pretty aggressively stemmy and green and tannic and edgy. And, I think I've had lots of moments where I'm like, oh crap, what have I done? But, I found in the cellar 99% of the time is the answer, and not being reactionary, but letting the wine kind of evolve and take its course, and not trying to make it per se, but letting it do what it wants to do. But yeah, I think Zotovich Vineyard and cool climate Santa Rita Hills Syrah in general is a great fit for stem inclusion, because it really checks all those boxes, and you can produce an elegant wine that really, you know, the stem inclusion, it's definitely evident there, but I don't think it whacks you over the head. It's
Right.
pretty well integrated. And, you know, I feel that way about oak as well. We don't use any new oak on this wine, but
Okay.
for me, I want the oak to be there to the point where I can't really tell that it's there. You know,
Right.
playing a supporting role, but it's not driving the wine. And that's sort of the philosophy on stem inclusion too.
Wow, great job on this. This is awesome. I mean,
Thanks.
absolutely incredible. I love the balance and the knobs, volume knobs. You know, I like the volume knobs. This is, yeah, just turn it up and balance it left and right stereo, you know, keep it.
You got to have it balanced.
That's right. I love this. This is great. I think we should go to Kristin. Kristin, what do you think? Maybe we should taste a little bit of the Black Bear Block Syrah, if that's okay with you. I'm going to be honest with you for a sec. When I first pulled this out from the shipment, I was like, I'm just going to give it a little tibble just to make sure everything is okay. And I'm really glad I did. I went ahead and Corrivened it, and I had a little bit of a tibble. If you can see, it's quite a bit of a tibble, but I cheated. I'm so sorry. But here it is. Talk to us a little bit about this wine. I know we kind of already talked just a little bit about the history, but let's talk about the 2016 vintage for you here.
Yeah, for us, knockout vintage. It was just, you know, especially coming off 2014 and 15, very early harvests, kind of crazy growing seasons. But 2016, you know, kind of a normal bud break in March, long growing season, not a lot of frost. I don't think any really frost events for us. And moderates, you know, got a little bit of heat in the summer, but then it backed off right into harvest. So it was, you know, logistically, obviously, when you get to really take the time to make the picks you want to make because you have the tank space, that's always a great thing. So everything just came in as it should, and just watching these, you know, wines evolve over time. You know, they came out of the gates pretty, you know, tannins really pretty approachable, and just even today, just continue to watch the wine evolve. It's been really fun across the board with this whole vintage. So,
is this current release then for you then for this block?
Yeah, this was released last year. So, yeah,
love it. So this is the question. We have, you know, Ballard Canyon, Santa Rita Hills. We have Santa Ynez Valley. We're going up towards Santa Maria eventually here. I mean, we have such a diverse picture, this canvas with the palette, and people are able to kind of describe Syrah in different colors, not literally, but kind of this kind of the physiology of what Syrah can be. So why Santa Ynez Valley? Like what is it about Santa Ynez Valley that just made it such an amazing kind of impact for Syrah and Santa Barbara?
Yeah, I mean, our location, you know, we're on kind of more the northern edge of the Santa Ynez Valley. We're actually really close to the Santa Maria AVA line right there. So we're in a more of a mixed climate. We average region 2, but we can, you know, cooler vintages were as cool as region 1, you know, and warmer vintages. So as far as Syrah is considered, we're seeing that in the profiles here, that it can be grown in, you know, these different growing conditions. So it, you know, we kind of get the best of any vintage being in our location. So it's kind of a unique site where, you know, our vineyard site is elevated at 1,500 to 1,600 feet in elevation. So we sit above the fog line, so we get the early morning sunshine, and then the wind, you know, kind of blows over those lower valleys and around 1 or 2 o'clock. So it cools everything off, which, you know, helps keep that balance with the acidity in the wine. So
I like it. I have a geeky question for you, since we're talking about regions and we're talking a little bit about like the sense of place. How important is soil and the soil series for this particular style of wine for you from this particular vineyard?
Yeah, I mean, our soils are fairly consistent just because we're on the terraces. We do have one hillside sloped Syrah, which shows a little bit more impactful, a little bit more concentrated, a little bit leaner soil sites. But we have a lot of Monterey shale, you know, sprinkled in. So just it kind of keeps the tannins a little bit dustier, and which I think is a nice profile. And obviously the vines struggle a little bit, which is always a great thing.
Talk to me about the struggle. How much is it a struggle? Is it because they're not getting water or nutrients, or what?
Yeah, poor nutrient topsoil.
Okay.
But yeah, we do irrigate. But you know, the black bear is unique because of the vine age. It doesn't react to the temperature spikes and, you know, the things that the younger vines kind of show a little bit more. It tends to ease the storm and kind of ride it out, and you don't have to panic too much like with some of the younger vines.
I can't even imagine. I'm going to tell you real quick, personal anecdote again. I had an opportunity a long time ago. This is 2006. Got to make some Syrah for myself. I thought I could do it. I thought I could make some Syrah up in Napa. And you guys, it was the worst Syrah I've ever tasted in my life. It was absolutely the worst. So it brought me to my knees, literally looking for, you know, people like yourselves to really give me some guidance. If I was wanting to make Syrah in Santa Barbara, just if I had the capital, if I had just endless amount of resources, Kristin, what would be the #1 piece of advice that you could give me if I'm just starting out? This is vintage one. It's, you know, I'm buying fruit maybe. Talk to me. What do I need to do?
Well, I think you need to decide on the style that you're looking for, because I mean, today is a perfect example of the dynamic, you know, wines that you find in this region. So, you know, you got to start there first.
Okay, you made it sound too easy. It's obviously not that easy. So I'm going to move on to maybe talk to Bob, because I think I need some advice from someone who can give me some advice on this. Besides yourself, obviously, you did great giving me some advice. But Bob, I think you have some secrets that you're willing to maybe share. Let's talk about your.
My advice, Lamar, would be not to do it unless you already have a market for it.
I know, right? Just seems
that because the Syrah boomed so much in the 1990s. So many people planted it and started making it. It kind of got ahead of itself in the marketplace, and there was, you know, like it actually created kind of a Syrah malaise, if you will, among wine buyers, because there were all of a sudden too many of them before the market really was there for the wines. And it's kind of corrected itself now. I think a lot of Syrah was frankly grafted over to Pinot Noir after Cypress, because which is kind of a remarkable thing when you think about it, that you could actually grow Syrah and Pinot Noir in the same vineyard and have them do well. But we can do that in Santa Barbara County. It's one of the few places in the world, I think, where you can actually do that and do it as well as we do it here. But anyway, I think Kristin made a good point. You want to pick the style that you want to make first, and then zero in on the vineyard site to kind of match that style. You know, whether you want cool climate like Zotovich or Nacido, or whether you want a slightly warmer climate like Larner or Zaca Mesa or someplace in the San Ynez Valley. Zaca Mesa is very unique, as Kristin pointed out, because it is in the San Ynez Valley, but it could almost be its own AVA just based on how unique it is.
Right.
And I actually wanted to comment on a new AVA called Olivos Canyon, which is right behind Zaca Mesa, and so Zaca Mesa probably is as much Olivos Canyon in style as it is anything from San Ynez Valley, which is a very big and broad AVA.
For sure. Yeah. I'm glad you pointed that out too, because it's just the diversity again, the meso, the macro, like, I mean, the climates are different. The soil series are completely different. This brings me, you mentioned Bien Nacido. I think I have a treasure here that you are willing to share with us.
Yeah, you know, I made Syrah from Bien Nacido for years, beginning in 1987, with a vineyard block that was actually originally planted to Riesling at Bien Nacido. It was planted to Riesling in 1973, and then in 1986 it was grafted over to Syrah, and I started making, the 87 was the first crop. I started making Syrah from that block, which is called the X block at Zaca Mesa. And I still make Syrah from that original X block. The Z block is a newer planting at Bien Nacido, but it's now quite mature. It was planted first in 1992, so it's it's now, fairly mature. Planted up on a hillside. It was the first hillside planting at Via Nacido of Syrah, on a southwest facing kind of hillside slope. There's a little like hanging valley on this one hill that faces kind of perfectly southwest, and it's a kind of an ideal spot. The Miller family that owned Via Nacido asked me about, I wanted to buy more Syrah from them, and they said, what should we do? Where would you plant it? And I pointed to this hillside that I had hiked and kind of checked out, and they said, "Oh, that's impossible. We don't have any roads up there. We don't have any water up there. It would be very expensive to plant it." And I signed a long-term, very expensive contract with them to plant it, and they did. And then they kept adding on to it and adding different customers for it. And it was pretty quickly, they figured out that it was an even better site than that X block, which had been grafted 5 or 6 years prior. So anyways, I continue to make Syrah from both of those blocks. They're different. They're both Estrella clone. We've been talking about clones, and it's an ideal spot. I use quite a bit of whole clusters. It depends on the vintage. In 2019, I think I used about 40% whole cluster in this, and
Wow.
right around
Nice.
13 to 13.5 alcohol, kind of in that range. And I do like to use a little bit of new oak. I use Francois Frere Burgundy barrels with the Z Block Syrah. So this is about a third new oak in the program, and about a third 1-year-old barrels, which also give it a little bit of oak influence.
So this is what
Larry pointed out early on. Yeah, that's this one.
barrel sample.
Yeah, a barrel sample. Yeah, we're bottling this wine in April, and when Larry asked me to be a part of this seminar, I was like, great, I'll do that. But then I realized that I am no longer involved with Toupee, so I realized that I didn't have any Santa Barbara County Syrah except in barrel. I did make a 2018 Syrah, but it was already sold out. So I wanted to show something from Santa Barbara County. So the only way around that was to show a barrel sample. So I apologize for having such young wine, but it's kind of fun to try it.
No apology necessary, Bob. I will say, when I did open up the box and I had this, I thought it was a little bit contraband. I looked around and I was like, it's okay. It's okay. Let's talk about.
I was gonna say, I only have 3 barrels of this, so it's pretty precious also. So that's
Wow.
why I did the barrel samples in half bottles, just
Wow.
to not extract as much out. But
Well, thank you for sharing with us.
Yeah.
happy to.
I want to talk a little bit more about Via Nacido. I feel like, I read the Forbes article that just came out not too long ago saying one of the greatest vineyards on the planet. Wine enthusiasts said the same thing. What is it about that hillside, that vineyard?
It's the site and the soil. So the combination of all the terroir factors. The climate, the soil, the exposure, and then great farming. You have to if you have all those components and you farm it correctly, then you have something real special. And it is very unique. It sits right in the heart of the Santa Maria Valley, which if you think about the Santa Maria Valley, it's a valley where a lot of vegetables and strawberries are grown, but they're grown down on the flats in the richer soil. All the vineyards are up on the either the slightly elevated hillsides that were originally planted,
Yeah.
or the higher hillsides that were planted a little bit later, like the Z Block. Those hillsides were used for cattle grazing, so now there's grapes on them, and there's still cattle grazing on them, but interspersed with grapes and actually the Millers have some avocados growing there too, cool climate avocados, which is kind of cool.
I love it.
It's just a special spot.
This is remarkable, and it's a barrel sample, 2019 barrel sample. I like this now, Bob. I mean, I don't know what to tell you except let's bottle this up, and I'll bring the truck over.
Well, hopefully I made a good decision waiting to bottle it in April. It's kind of based on previous experience, and right now the cellar is so cold
Right.
that it's not going to change a lot in barrel between now and April. And it just giving it a little extra time to kind of, evolve in barrel before bottling it is always a good thing. And bottling it before it goes through another summer. We don't air condition our cellar. We don't need to in the Santa Maria Valley. We have night fans, and I think most wineries in Santa Barbara County can cool their cellars this same way without air conditioning, bringing in night air and then closing the vents during the day and having a well insulated winery building works really well. So, but anyways, because it's not air conditioned in the summertime, the temperature gradually climbs a little bit, and then in the winter, gradually goes back down. But I don't want it to sit through 2 summers in barrel.
Yeah.
So we're bottling it in April.
I love this. I think we were talking about the Nacido Vineyard being very iconic. There's some great chatter on our chat box here between a lot of different people, and I apologize if I can't mention everyone, but I mean, we had Tom Hill, we had Steve, we had Phil, we had Lisa, Denise. We're all talking about Grand Cru, this term Grand Cru in Santa Barbara. This could be for anyone on the panel, but when you think of Grand Cru, the term, in Santa Barbara, there's some that have popped up in this chat here, but what do you guys think vineyard sites that would be considered Grand Cru? And this could be a loaded question, but I want to hear what you think. Larry, what do you think?
Well, there's only one according to somebody's label, and it's Sea Smoke. So I think we all, sorry. Sorry, I had to go there. I apologize.
Oh man!
Before I do that, Bob, wrong with that, Larry.
Bob, before I do that, Tom Hill was asking. He said the X Block is own rooted. Is the Z Block grafted, and if so, why is it grafted versus own rooted?
Good question.
In the early 90s, when Z Block was planted, there was a scare of phylloxera in Santa Barbara County. We didn't have phylloxera in Santa Barbara County, but there was a worry about it. So when the original blocks were planted in the 70s, there was no worry about phylloxera. So people planted on own rooted vines. This was own rooted Riesling. So that was it was a financial and I think qualitative decision too. I think there is a certain amount of quality to planting on own roots as well. Not necessarily better, but it's very distinct. It's distinctive. But when Z Block was planted, there was a scare of phylloxera. The millers were conservative about that, so they planted it on 5C rootstock, which ended up being a good match as well for the soil that they had on that block.
Man, it's interesting. I want to see a study done on own rooted versus grafted. I know there's one out there. I'm trying to figure out where I've seen it, but you could do a whole series in Santa Barbara on that. I mean, we've seen a lot of own rooted vineyards. We've seen a lot of different clonal designations for Syrah specifically. This brings us back to that question I want to ask. Matt, let's talk Syrah clones. I've been wanting to hear about your designation and your choices in Syrah. This is going to be a little geeky, but I want it. Give it to me.
Well, I have an opinion on most of the clones. My previous winemaking at Jaffers before SAMsARA was really Syrah heavy, so I got to work with lots of different Syrah vineyards and lots of different clones. I guess for me, the site always trumps the clone. So for me, I'm looking mostly at the other elements of the vineyard and the terroir, and that's more critical for me than the clone itself. But that being said, I do have some preferences. I like the concentration of 174.
Yeah.
I try to steer clear of 383 because for me that one's just a little less complex. I've had some really great experiences with 470 lately. It seems like that's kind of the new hot Syrah clone. And then Estrella, which we've talked a lot about tonight, is sort of the tried and true in Santa Barbara. Although it kind of seems like, and maybe everybody else can chime in here, but it kind of seems like, are people planting Estrella anymore? Are there new Estrella blocks going in? Because it doesn't seem that way to me, but maybe I'm just not looking at the right vineyards.
Do we know, Bob? Do you know if anyone's?
I don't know. You know, I do have a preference for a number of clones, Estrella being one of them. And I actually prefer the Estrella clone to the on-top clones, which so I'm gonna contradict Matt's preference a little bit, and not out of total respect, because this is a beautiful wine. But I have at the Sawyer Lindquist Vineyard, which is in the Edna Valley, slightly different area than where Nacido is, but similar climate. We have the Estrella clone. We have some clones that we got from John Alban, which he had brought in, suitcase clones that are great clones, and also UC Davis Clone 1, which is just a lot of people just call Clone 1, which is a great clone. And my preference would be for any of those three clones over any of the Ontov clones. But they're all good. They're all good. They're just it's degrees. So you're picking. Yeah. You're really it's nitpicking, I guess would be.
Yeah, no, this is good. I don't want to start a war and talk about the Ontov versus suitcase clones and all that, but I definitely want to talk about it. I honestly, like, I hear about the Ontov clones, and I'm fascinated with that. We all know there's a history of suitcase clones coming into California. We wouldn't have a lot of the fun wine stories if we didn't have cool pirate stories too. So I'm all about it. I love that. I love the Estrella. I love the Alban clone. I love the contrast to the 470, the 174 and 383. I've had that before. Larry, talk to me about clones. Who would you pick in your band of Syrah based on clones?
Well, I'll say that I'm sure I'm going to guess that Matt and Bob have a lot more experience with more clones than I do, but I will echo Matt's concept that site trumps clone. I think that's true in pretty much every variety. There are certain clones, for instance, with Pinot that do great in every site. There's certain clones that do well in certain sites, but not well in other sites. I've worked with 5 or 6 different Syrah clones, and I will say that from my perspective, Estrella is just consistently spot on for what I'm looking for in the variety. But that also is a very subjective concept, right? Because what I'm looking for may not be what other people are looking for. I don't think clonal material is as important in Syrah as site. And it is an interesting question about Estrella being planted or not being planted anymore. I don't know if it is or not, and that just could be more trend than anything else. And the same could be true with most varieties now, looking for new clones that are supposedly offering something different than what's already out there.
Hey, Larry, I'd like to chime in on something about clones really quick, if you don't mind.
Please.
We keep calling it the Estrella clone, but really what it is the Chapoutier clone.
We think. We don't know, though, right?
Well, we pretty much know. I mean, the man who brought it into the U.S. at UC Davis is no longer with us, so we don't have direct evidence, but we have anecdotal evidence from Gary Eberly and from his contemporaries at UC Davis at the time, that Professor Goheen had brought in, maybe it was Olmo. I think it was Olmo who actually brought it in from Chapoutier, and Goheen was the guy who gave it to Gary Eberly. But they planted it in the UC Davis test block. It was not an approved varietal yet, or approved clone yet. And Gary, basically stole budwood, from UC Davis test block to get his original planting going, and because it didn't have, official lineage, it was then dubbed the Estrella clone, because that's only as far back as anybody could officially tell where it came from.
Allegedly stole.
Right.
Yeah.
Good point. Yeah.
Yeah, but okay, so this is gonna bring, I mean, this could be a whole other hour of talking about the Estrella clone, because I want to talk about Chapoutier eventually too. Are we talking about Michel Chapoutier?
Yeah, and it would have been his father that Olmo met up with, because Michel's younger than I am, and this was in the late 1960s when Olmo brought the budwood over to plant it at UC Davis. So it would have been Michelle's father.
I think we need to get a phone call in and see if we can phone a friend on this one.
Michelle's father is no longer with us either. So
yeah,
but I think Michelle would back up the fact that the Estrella clone did come from Chapoutier and Hermitage, way back when.
Passionately too. I bet he would be passionate about it. Okay, so this is good. Kristin, you're last on the list. What clones would you use?
I mean, I agree about the site is obviously the most impactful. But for me, because I make, 6, 7 different Syrahs, the clonal material is important on our site, just because of the different characteristics.
Yeah.
I would agree, Estrella is definitely always leads the pack. But 470 is another really, really great clone. Very balanced, makes a very balanced wine, beautiful aromatic lift to it. There's a clone we have called Noir, which has a nice density to it, and also clone 3, just always a good backbone to any blend. So of course the Alban clones as well, those are always really dynamic and interesting. So
I love it.
Depends on the day, I guess.
Depends on the day and the site. It sounds like site, everyone agrees that site trump.
Site is more important, and that's true with pretty much any clone or grape variety. Site is the most important factor, and site and climate, which all goes together with the site.
This all begs to ask the question of, as consumers are starting to enjoy Syrah, I like to ask the question of, like, where do we see the future of Syrah, knowing that it is probably the best quality price ratio out on the market for us. And I'm being very biased, obviously, but the value that it has for consumers. Does clones matter? Does site matter for people? Like, when it comes down to it, is there a future with, like, Syrah imploding or exploding?
No, it's going to continue to grow. And I didn't mean to just jump in there, but as you were talking about that concept, I thought of a quote that I love to always throw out there during any Syrah seminar, and the quote is attributed to Jim Filek when he was working at Zaca Mesa, and Jim's direct quote was, "Syrah delivers what Merlot promised," and I think that's true. Not that there's anything wrong with Merlot, but Syrah grows so much better in so many different climates than Merlot does. And it produces a wine that's powerful and rich and can go with the richest foods that you would want to have a red wine with, but much more consistently than Merlot does. And it doesn't have the tannin structure that makes you have to wait like Cabernet Sauvignon does.
Yeah.
So anyways, Syrah delivers what Merlot promised. Jim Filek.
Great quote. I mean, absolutely. I'm with you, Lisa. I hate waiting for tannins to subside and for age. I'm super impatient. I love having a Corvin. This isn't a plug on Corvin, but I love having anything that kind of gets me into the wine before it's time, so I can taste it. But Syrah, I know that I can just dive in head first, and I never have a regret. This is good. I love hearing about this. I think we've talked a lot about the history. We talked about the diversity of all the regions of Santa Barbara. I mean, a lot of regions. We haven't talked about every single one with Syrah, obviously, but we talked about clones, talked about the value for money. I mean, anything from like Syrah rosés to Cinquenon, like it could be anything. The world is your oyster, for sure, with Syrah. I have one question, and then we'll kind of open it up for a couple questions on the chat real quick. We have a couple minutes here, but and this is the question I'd like to ask. Kristin, you're first, as always. Let me see your style of Syrah. If it could be a band or a song or an artist, you want us to come back to you?
Yeah, I mean, what would you call it?
No. We're coming back to you, Larry. What do you got?
I knew this question was coming. I had to think about it. I thought about the fact that I I did a Cote Rôtie style for mine. So I'm going to go with the Traveling Wilburys.
Whoa, whoa. Okay.
It takes an army. It kind of, I mean, I'm looking at all of us in this group and I kind of feel that way as well. So
I like that. There's some unification there. That organic sound, the Traveling Wilburys. I like that. It's very fun. Matt, we gotta hear from you. Honestly, what style? If your wine, if your Syrah was a style, or the style of your Syrah was a band or a song or a musician, who would it be?
I wish I had prepared for this because I need a little more time, but
I have prepared for it if you want a little more time.
well, I think I got it because I gotta stay true to the SAMsARA core and go with the Grateful Dead because you know, the complexity and the yumminess factor that Syrah can deliver. You know, there's a lot going on and it's just fun and you like. And
now, if I asked you about Pinot, I think you're going to answer the same band, though. That's the problem.
you know, you're not wrong, Larry. Yeah, it's a lot of Grateful Dead to make these wines.
I can almost hear it. I can almost hear it. I like that. Good answer.
Better you can hear it than smell it.
Bob, what are we thinking here? Is this the Kinks? What is this?
It's always the Kinks.
Yeah.
The Kinks have so many different, you know, layers and so many different styles, and this is the 50th anniversary of one of their greatest albums called Lola versus the Power Man and the Money Go Round.
Yeah.
And there's been a 50th anniversary release of that album with all kinds of bonus tracks, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think about that album, not any particular song. The song Power Man, you know, you could kind of equate that maybe to Syrah, but Syrah is more elegant than Power Man is, and it's not as elegant as Lola was. So it's somewhere in between those two.
And folks, if you're watching, there's a link to Bob's selling of the Kinks anniversary record. I'm only kidding. You are like the poster child of the Kinks. I think that you could sell more Kinks records than anybody I know. And I agree with you.
For me, they're right there with the Beatles and the Beach Boys, but the Beatles and the Beach Boys don't need help selling their products. The Kinks are a little bit underappreciated. So
yeah, I agree. It's very underdog. I like that. Kristin, what do you got?
Well, I saw something pop up in the chat here from my coworker Garrett at Zaca, and he threw out Nirvana. That was
good
so
call.
We'll go with that.
We're gonna go with that. Thanks, Garrett Black. I appreciate that. You know, definitely love a little grunge. This has got a little Nirvana to it. Maybe a little Mudhoney. I like it. It's Soundgarden, maybe a little Soundgarden pre the explosion of Bad Motorfinger. Yeah, I could see that. This is good. I appreciate the chatter about this kind of thing because I think it humanizes a lot of what we look at in wine, and wine can be put on a pedestal and then it could be part of the table and everyday conversation. That's kind of why we're doing all this. And honestly, we had some great questions pop up. We had some amazing chatter on here. So before we kind of land the plane here, I just wanted to kind of give a couple shout outs real quick. Jenny, thank you so much for jumping in. To Phil, obviously Phil, we love you. Great conversation there. And then Tom Hill. Tom, I think, does Tom have these wines? Because he's like tasting along with us. I like this. This is great. Any questions that you guys might have, throw them in the chat box before we kind of land the plane here. But anything goes here. We're talking Syrah, Santa Barbara County, and let us know. There was a question earlier that I wanted to ask Bob, and it was from Tom Hill, about what did you think of the first Phelps Syrah? And I think you might know more about that than I think I know what he's referring to.
Yeah, the 74 vintage. It was good. It wasn't outstanding. But it was good, and it showed the kind of potential I think that Syrah had in California. You know, the Syrahs from Phelps got much better, you know, as the years progressed, and they kind of fine-tuned it and planted better vineyards. And the original wine that they made actually came from a vineyard that was planted by the Christian brothers of all people.
Yeah.
And it was in a field blend, you know, kind of similar to what McDowell Valley had back in those days, where they had a field blend of Syrah that had been there for a while, but nobody knew what it was. And
Yeah.
and then Phelps planted, you know, up near Joseph Phelps Winery, and you know, it kind of went up in quality from that. But I liked the first Phelps Syrah, but it wasn't nearly as good as those Syrahs that I was getting from Kermit Lynch. That's for sure.
I love it. And obviously we're biased here in Santa Barbara. I can't tell you the fact that this is one of my favorite varieties, and my favorite people talking about this variety. This is good. We also have coming up here, Rhone Rangers does have another event coming up, and Steven is asking me if I could point it out. Definitely check out the website, you guys, so that you guys can stay abreast as to all of the events coming up. There is another one that's coming up. Larry, do you know a little bit more about that one? I think that one is on the website, if anybody knows.
It's the National Rhone Rangers is doing a International Syrah Day tasting in February, and then in March I think it's women winemakers, if I'm not mistaken. And in Santa Barbara County, we're planning on doing a Viognier later on this month, or we might extend it a little bit and then focus on Grenache in March. We're going to try to do this on a monthly basis, if I can gather the troops up to do it. We have plenty of wines. It's just a matter of getting people to want to take part. But really excited about showing off what Santa Barbara County has to offer, the personalities, the diversity of fruit, the diversity of wines. Quite exciting. And thank you, Lamar, for leading the charge.
Yeah, you bet, you guys. And I just wanted to thank everybody that joined us tonight and signed on. Thank you guys so much for your interaction. It was electric. I loved it. And I'm excited. These wines are amazing. Kristin, thank you so much for your insight. Larry, as always, incredible wines. Matt, I'm excited. I can't wait to taste with you when the time's right again. I'm excited about it. And Bob, it's always a pleasure to taste with you. So cheers.
I know what I'm having for dinner tonight.
You know,
or at least the wine that we're having.
You know what you're having.
Of
You got the wine ready to rock. I love it.
I'm not sure what we're going to eat, but I know it's going to be Syrah really great.
I'm going to finish that Z Block and put on the kinks. That's my plan.
There you go.
There it is. That sounds like a good plan, Matt. I appreciate that. Well, you guys, thank you guys so much for jumping in on this and for these beautiful wines. You guys obviously are incredible force to be reckoned with when it comes to Syrah, and you are very talented and love your dynamics and your passion, you guys, and your charisma. So thank you guys so much. Keep up the charge, and cheers to your health, you guys.
Cheers. Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you guys.
Yeah.
Thanks for tuning in.